My name is Simone, and at 32 years old, I stood in the middle of a funeral reception, holding a silver tray of champagne while my husband ended our marriage with a smile. After my father-in-law's funeral, my unemployed husband Jamal inherited $570 million. He looked at me with a smug grin that made my blood run cold. "You are useless now," he sneered loud enough for the guests to hear. "I do not need you anymore." He tossed divorce papers onto the tray I was holding like I was nothing more than hired help. But what Jamal did not know was that the will had a secret clause, a clause that would turn his victory into a nightmare. Before I tell you how I brought a billionaire to his knees, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Comment down below where you are watching from. Trust me, you will want to see how this plays out. The air inside the Winston estate in Atlanta was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and old money. This was supposed to be a repast, a solemn gathering to honor the passing of Winston Sr., the patriarch of the family. But to everyone else in the room, it felt more like a lottery celebration. I adjusted my simple black dress, the only thing I could afford after paying for Winston's hospice care for the last 6 months. While the guests in their designer suits and silk dresses laughed and clinked glasses, I was running back and forth to the kitchen, trying to keep the hors d'oeuvres trays full. I was not treated like the daughter-in-law, I was treated like the help. "Simone, move faster." The sharp voice of Mama Estelle cut through the jazz music. My mother-in-law sat at the VIP table, looking like a queen on her throne, draped in black velvet and fanning herself with a program. "Where is the vintage champagne? My son is thirsty, and he does not drink sparkling water." I hurried over, my feet aching in my worn-out heels. "I am sorry, Mama Estelle," I said, keeping my voice low to avoid a scene. "The caterers are opening the bottles now. It just takes a moment." She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with undisguised disdain. "You are just useless, aren't you? Winston is barely cold in the ground, and you are already failing to support this family. You are only here because my son has a soft heart. Do not forget you are just a leech attached to the Winston name. So do your job and serve the guests properly." As she reached for a napkin, she deliberately knocked her elbow into the tray I was holding. Ice water spilled down the front of my dress and soaked into my shoes. A few guests nearby gasped, but Mama Estelle just clicked her tongue. "Look at you," she hissed. "Clumsy. Messy. You are embarrassing us. Go clean yourself up before Jamal sees you looking like a drowned rat." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone in this room the truth. That for the last 2 years, while Mama Estelle was vacationing in Miami and Jamal was out partying with his friends, I was the one changing Winston's bedpans. I was the one managing his medication. I was the architect who worked double shifts to pay the mortgage on this very mansion because the family trust was illiquid. They called me a leech, but I was the only thing keeping this family afloat. But I said nothing. I grabbed a napkin, dabbed at my dress, and turned back to the kitchen. I did it for Winston. He was the only one who ever respected me, and I would not ruin his funeral. Suddenly, the double oak doors of the ballroom swung open with a dramatic bang, silencing the room. The murmurs died down as everyone turned to look. It was Jamal, my husband. He was not wearing the black morning suit we had picked out together last week. Instead, he was wearing a custom electric blue Versace suit that shimmered under the chandeliers. He looked like he was walking a red carpet, not attending his father's funeral. He strode into the room, chin held high, flanked by his brother Trey and his sister-in-law Courtney. He looked radiant. He looked victorious. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down at the screen and saw a notification from my credit card app. A charge for $5,000 at the Versace boutique just 2 hours ago. My stomach dropped. He had bought that suit with my card. The card I used to buy groceries. The card that was already maxed out from paying the funeral home deposit. Jamal walked to the center of the room, taking a microphone from the band leader. He did not look at the grieving guests. He did not look at the large portrait of his father. He looked like a man who had just won the Super Bowl. "Thank you all for coming," he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Today we say goodbye to my father, but we also say hello to a new era." He paused for dramatic effect, smiling at the crowd. "Everyone knows my father was a careful man, a frugal man. But he left behind a legacy, $570 million. A collective gasp went through the room. It was tacky. It was disrespectful. But Jamal did not care. He was intoxicated by the number. "And now that I am the head of this family," Jamal continued, unbuttoning his jacket to show off the silk lining, "things are going to change. I am done with penny pinching. I am done with living small. It is time for the Winstons to live like kings." He raised his glass of champagne high. "To freedom, to wealth, and to trimming the fat." The crowd cheered hesitantly, caught up in his charisma despite the awkwardness. I stood by the kitchen door, tray in hand, feeling invisible. He had not mentioned me. He had not looked at me. I was his wife of 5 years, the woman who had supported him through 3 failed business ventures and 2 layoffs. And in his moment of triumph, I did not exist. Then his eyes swept the room and landed on me. The smile did not leave his face, but his eyes went cold. He beckoned me over with a single finger like he was calling a dog. "Come here, Simone," he said into the microphone. "Come stand by your husband." I hesitated, but the eyes of 200 guests pushed me forward. I walked toward him, my wet shoes squishing softly on the marble floor. I thought maybe he was going to thank me. Maybe he was going to acknowledge that without my salary, this house would have been foreclosed on last year. I reached him and forced a supportive smile. "Jamal, please," I whispered. "This isn't the time." He looked down at me, his expression shifting from arrogance to disgust. "You look terrible," he said. His voice amplified by the mic he forgot to lower. "Look at you. Wet. Ragged. You do not fit in this picture anymore, do you?" Confusion washed over me. "Jamal, what are you doing?" He laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "I am cleaning house, Simone. I am a billionaire now. I need a woman who looks the part, a woman who knows how to shine. You are just basic. You are a reminder of the struggling life I just left behind." He reached into the inner pocket of his flashy blue suit. I thought he was pulling out a handkerchief. Instead, he pulled out a folded document. "I do not need a maid anymore," he announced to the room, tossing the papers onto the silver tray I was still clutching. "I need a queen, and you are fired." I looked down at the papers. "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. Sign them," he said, his voice booming. "Do it now. Do not make this difficult. You are useless to me, Simone. Take your little architect salary and go. The real money stays with the Winstons." The room was deadly silent. I could feel Mama Estelle's smirk burning into my back. I could see Courtney whispering something to Trey and giggling. My heart hammered against my ribs. The humiliation was hot and suffocating. But as I looked at Jamal, this man I had loved and supported, preening like a peacock in a suit, I paid for something inside me snapped. I did not cry. I did not beg. I looked at the papers, then I looked at him. "Are you sure about this, Jamal?" I asked, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "You want to do this right now?" "Here." He sneered, leaning in close. "I want you gone. You are nothing but dead weight." I took a deep breath. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the alcohol on his breath made me nauseous. I remembered the long nights at the hospital with Winston. I remembered the conversations we had when Jamal was too busy gaming to visit. I remembered what Winston had told me about the will. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a pen. I did not use the gold pen he offered. I used my own cheap ballpoint pen. I placed the papers on the edge of a nearby table right next to a vase of white lilies. "Okay, Jamal," I said, loud enough for the front row to hear. "If that is what you want." I signed my name. The ink was dark and permanent. "There," I said, straightening up. "I am gone." "But Jamal, There is one thing you forgot. He laughed, turning back to his cheering friends. And what is that? That I will miss your cooking. No, I said softly, a smile touching my lips for the first time that day. You forgot to read the will. Jamal waved his hand dismissively. My Uncle Vernon is the lawyer. I do not need to read it. I get everything. Now get out of my house. I turned and walked away, leaving the tray, the papers, and my marriage behind. As I walked toward the heavy oak doors, I heard him popping another bottle of champagne. He thought he had won. He thought he was a king. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. The applause for Jamal's speech about his new wealth finally died down, leaving a buzzing tension in the room. I stood near the kitchen doors, my arms aching from the weight of the heavy silver tray filled with uneaten crab cakes. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink into the marble floor and vanish before anyone noticed the tears pricking my eyes. But Jamal was not done. He was just getting started. He turned his head slowly, scanning the crowd until his gaze landed on me. It was a look I knew well. It was the look he gave a waiter who brought the wrong order or a valet who took too long with his car. It was a look of utter contempt. Simone. He called out, his voice slicing through the murmur of the guests. Get over here. The command was casual, like he was calling a dog. The guests parted, forming a pathway between us. I hesitated. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Mama Estelle, hoping for some sign of intervention, but she just sipped her champagne and watched with amusement. I took a breath and stepped forward, the tray trembling in my hands. As I approached him, I tried to read his face. Was he drunk? Was he grieving in his own twisted way? Maybe he was going to thank me for organizing the funeral. Maybe he was finally going to acknowledge that I was the one who held his hand while his father took his last breath. I stopped 2 feet in front of him. Yes, Jamal, I said softly, trying to keep my dignity intact. He looked me up and down, his lip curling. You really wore that dress? He sneered low enough that only those close by could hear. You look like a maid. But I guess that fits, since that is all you are good for now. I blinked, confusion clouding my mind. Jamal, what are you saying? He laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. I am saying the show is over, Simone. The old man is in the ground. I do not have to pretend to be the dutiful husband anymore. I do not have to pretend to like your cheap cooking or your boring little life. He reached into the inside pocket of his flashy blue suit. For a split second, I thought he was reaching for his wallet to tip me like the help he treated me as. But he pulled out a folded document. It was thick and legal-looking. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it. The papers landed with a wet slap right in the middle of the silver tray, burying themselves in the crab cakes and garnish. Grease stains immediately began to soak into the crisp, white paper. I looked down. Petition for divorce. The words swam before my eyes. Sign it, Jamal said, his voice booming, now performing for his audience. Do it today. My dad is dead, Simone. I do not need to play the role of the good husband anymore. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I stood frozen, the tray feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. You see that number on the inheritance check? Jamal continued, pointing a manicured finger at me. $570 million. That is Winston money. That is king money. And let me be crystal clear, Simone. This $570 million has no part for you. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cruelty. You were a placeholder, a safety net while I waited for my time. My time is now. And you are just baggage. So take your little papers, take your little tray, and get out of my sight. The cruelty was so absolute, so naked, that it took my breath away. He did not just want to leave me. He wanted to destroy me publicly. He wanted to strip me of every ounce of pride I had left. I looked at the man I had married, the man I had supported for 5 years, and realized I was looking at a stranger, a rich, dangerous stranger. I stood there, stunned by Jamal's cruelty, the divorce papers soaking up the grease from the crab cakes on my tray. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask him how he could do this after everything we had been through, but the words died in my throat. Before I could even take a breath, a flash of black velvet filled my vision. It was Mama Estelle. She did not look like a grieving widow. She looked like a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. She moved with a speed that belied her age, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor as she closed the distance between us. She did not look at her son. She did not look at the divorce papers. Her eyes were locked onto one thing, the single string of pearls around my neck. It was a modest necklace, not flashy like the diamonds she wore, but it was the most precious thing I owned. Winston had given it to me on my 30th birthday, whispering that I was the daughter he never had. He told me they belonged to his mother. He told me I was the only one worthy of wearing them. Mama Estelle stopped inches from my face. I could smell her heavy perfume, a cloying scent of gardenias that made me gag. Her eyes were wild with greed and malice. "You," she spat the word like a curse. "You do not get to keep that." I instinctively reached up to touch the cool, smooth beads. "Mama Estelle, what are you doing?" She did not answer with words. Instead, she reached out with a manicured hand, her long acrylic nails digging into the skin of my neck. She grabbed the necklace. There was no hesitation, no grace. She yanked. I gasped as the string bit into my skin before snapping with a sharp pop. Time seemed to slow down. The sound of the pearls hitting the marble floor echoed like gunshots in the silent ballroom. Clatter, click, roll. Dozens of creamy white pearls bounced and scattered, rolling under tables and guests' shoes. The one thing Winston had given me, the symbol of his love and acceptance, destroyed in a second. "Take it off," Mama Estelle screamed, her voice shrill and ugly. "Take it all off." She was panting now, her chest heaving beneath her black velvet dress. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "That necklace is Winston property. It belongs to this family. It does not belong to an outsider, to a leech." She looked around at the guests, seeking their approval, playing the victim perfectly. "Look at her!" she cried out, gesturing at me as I stood there, clutching my stinging neck. Standing there like she owns the place, wearing my husband's family heirlooms. "I know why you are here, Simone. I know why you clung to my husband while he was dying. You did not love him. You just wanted a piece of the pie. You stuck around for the money." The injustice of it burned hotter than the scratch on my neck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I was the one who paid for the private nurse when she said it was too expensive. I was the one who read to him when she was too busy shopping. I was the one who loved him when she was just waiting for him to die. But I could not speak. I could only watch as she kicked a stray pearl away with the toe of her shoe, her face twisted in a sneer. "You are trash," she hissed, leaning in close so only I could hear. "And now that Winston is gone, we are taking out the trash. Get out of my sight before I have security throw you out. And do not think about taking anything else. You leave with what you came with. Nothing." The guests whispered and stared. I felt naked, exposed. The physical pain in my neck was nothing compared to the hole being ripped in my heart. They had taken my husband, they had taken my dignity, and now they had taken the last piece of the man who had actually been a father to me. I stood there frozen as the pearls rolled away like tears across the cold marble floor. My hand hovered over my stinging neck where red welts were already rising. I thought the humiliation was over, but I was wrong. From the shadows of the VIP table, Courtney emerged. Trey's wife. She floated toward me in a designer dress that cost more than my car. Her blonde hair perfectly coiffed her face, a mask of bored amusement. She did not look at me at first. She looked down at the floor where Winston's gift lay scattered. With a lazy flick of her red-bottomed heel, she kicked a cluster of pearls away. They skittered across the tiles, vanishing under the tablecloths. It was a small motion, but it screamed disrespect louder than Mama Estelle's shouting ever could. She looked at the mess like it was something disgusting on the bottom of her shoe. Then she finally raised her eyes to meet mine. There was no pity there, only icy superior amusement. She stepped into my personal space, close enough that I could smell her expensive champagne breath. "Oh, Simone," she purred, her voice low and smooth like poisoned honey. "Do not look so shocked. Honestly, this is for the best." She reached out and flicked a stray thread on my shoulder, brushing off invisible dust. "You have to be realistic, darling. Look around you. Look at this house. Look at Jamal in that suit. You are just too basic for this life." She leaned in closer, her lips brushing my ear, but her voice projected just enough for the surrounding guests to hear every word. "Jamal is a billionaire now, Simone. He is royalty, and kings do not stay married to the help. He needs a woman who knows how to walk in heels without wobbling. He needs a woman who knows the difference between vintage champagne and sparkling cider. He needs someone high class, someone elegant, someone like me." She pulled back to look at my face, searching for the tears she wanted to see. "You were fine when he was broke," she continued, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You were fine for changing bedpans and paying bills. But this new world, this world of private jets and galas, you simply do not fit. You are an anchor, Simone, dragging him down to mediocrity. We are doing you a favor, really. Now you can go back to your little life and find a nice plumber or a mechanic, someone on your level. Leave the dynasty building to the professionals." She patted my cheek twice, a condescending gesture one would use on a slow child. Then she turned her back on me, linking arms with Trey, who had been watching with a smirk. They laughed together, a sound that grated against my raw nerves. I looked at them, these people who claimed to be family. They thought they were untouchable. They thought money made them gods. They had no idea that while they were busy kicking me when I was down, they were just giving me more reasons to destroy them. I stood there alone, my cheeks still burning from Courtney's touch, the laughter of my in-laws ringing in my ears like a death knell. They expected me to run. They expected me to crumble into a sobbing mess and beg for mercy. I could feel the tears pushing against the back of my eyes, hot and stinging. But I did not let them fall. Instead, I looked at the divorce papers lying on the floor next to a piece of shrimp toast. They were stained and crumpled, a perfect metaphor for my marriage. Slowly, deliberately, I knelt down. I did not care about the expensive dress I had saved for months to buy. I did not care about the stares of the guests who were watching the spectacle with morbid fascination. I picked up the papers, I brushed off a crumb, then I stood up. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I walked past Courtney, who was still giggling with Trey. I walked past Mama Estelle, who was busy loudly complaining about the quality of the service. I walked straight to the front of the room, where a large mahogany table held a framed portrait of Winston smiling his kind, gentle smile. Beside the portrait sat a heavy crystal vase filled with white roses. I placed the divorce papers on the table right next to Winston's picture. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the cheap plastic pen I used to take drink orders. It wasn't gold, it wasn't fancy, but it worked. I did not look back at Jamal. I did not look at anyone. I focused on the line at the bottom of the page, signature of respondent. I pressed the pen to the paper. The sound of the tip scratching against the page seemed deafening in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. Simone. I signed my name with a flourish, the letters bold and unyielding. It was done. I was free. I capped the pen and turned around. Jamal was watching me, a frown marring his handsome face. He looked confused, like a child who had just realized his toy was broken. I walked toward him, holding the papers out. "Here, Jamal," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "It is signed. You are free." He snatched the papers from my hand, sneering. "About time. Now get out." I did not move. Instead, I took a step closer until I was looking up into his eyes. There was no love there anymore. Just greed and emptiness. "I am going, Jamal," I said softly. "But before I go, I just have one question." He rolled his eyes, impatient to get back to his celebration. "What is it?" I smiled, a genuine smile that did not reach my eyes. "Are you sure you read the will?" Jamal stared at me for a second, then burst out laughing. It was a loud, braying sound that made him look foolish. "Read the will," he scoffed, looking around at his family for support. "Why would I need to read the will, Simone? My Uncle Vernon is the executor. He is the lawyer. He told me everything I need to know. I get the money. I get the house. I get the company. And you get nothing." He leaned in, his breath hot on my face. "I do not need to read legal mumbo-jumbo to know that I won." I held his gaze, my smile never wavering. "If you say so, Jamal. But you might want to ask Uncle Vernon about Article 7B. Just in case." I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes just for a second before he masked it with arrogance. "Whatever. Get out." I turned and walked away. My head was high, my steps sure. As I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool night air, I heard Jamal shouting for more champagne. He was celebrating his victory. He had no idea that the game had just begun, and he had already lost. The drive back to the penthouse was a blur of streetlights and unshed tears. My hands gripped the steering wheel of the modest sedan I had paid off 3 years ago, while Jamal drove the least luxury SUV I also paid for. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to peel off the dress that smelled like champagne and betrayal. I wanted to scrub the sensation of Courtney's condescending touch off my skin. I simply wanted to sleep until the world made sense again. I pulled into the parking garage, my spot thankfully empty. I took the private elevator up to the top floor, the silence of the building a stark contrast to the cacophony of the funeral reception. I reached the heavy mahogany door of our apartment. No, my apartment. I was the one who signed the lease. I was the one who wrote the check every single month while Jamal claimed he was waiting for his big break that never came. I reached out and punched in the code. 1984, the year Winston was born. A harsh beep sounded and a red light flashed on the keypad. Access denied. I frowned. My fingers were trembling slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. I must have mistyped it. I took a deep, steadying breath and typed it again slowly. 1, 9, 8, 4. Access denied. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my chest. I tried my birthday. I tried our anniversary. I tried every combination of numbers that had ever meant anything to us. Each time the red light blinked, mocking me. Then my phone buzzed in my hand, a notification from the smart home app. User access revoked. Before I could even process the cruelty of that, a voice message popped up from Jamal. My thumb hovered over the screen before I pressed play. His voice filled the empty hallway, slurred, slightly drunk on power and expensive liquor. "Simone, if you are listening to this, do not bother trying to get in. I changed the codes from the car on the way over. This penthouse is for winners, Simone. It is the home of a billionaire now. And you are just a bad memory. Do not come back. Do not call. Just disappear. You are good at being invisible, right? So vanish." The message ended with a click. I stood there staring at the door. My clothes were inside. My laptop with my design portfolio. My grandmother's ring. Everything I owned was behind that door, and he had locked me out like a stray cat. I pounded on the door. Jamal let me in. "This is my apartment. I paid the rent." Silence answered me. I pounded again, harder this time, my fist aching against the wood. "Open the door, Jamal. You cannot do this." But he could, and he had. I turned away from the door, defeated. I walked back to the elevator and down to the street level. As I pushed open the glass doors of the lobby, the sky opened up. It wasn't a gentle rain, it was a torrential downpour, a sudden violent storm that matched the wreckage of my life. I had no umbrella. My coat was still in the coat check at the Winston estate, forgotten in my hasty exit. Within seconds I was soaked to the bone. The water plastered my hair to my face and chilled me to the core. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the penthouse windows. The lights were on. I could imagine him up there pouring another drink, laughing at my misery. I was 32 years old. I was an award-winning architect, and I was standing on the street in the rain, homeless and husbandless, because I had dared to love a man who only loved himself. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold the shivering at bay. The rain mingled with the tears I finally let fall hot tracks on my cold cheeks. He had taken everything, or so he thought. He didn't know that standing there in the rain, stripped of my dignity and my home, he was forging something in me. He was turning my sadness into steel. I stood there shivering as the rain soaked through my thin dress, turning the fabric into a cold second skin. I was about to turn away to find shelter anywhere when a sound cut through the storm. It was the low, guttural roar of an engine. Not just any engine. It was the sound of a McLaren. I froze. I knew that sound. I knew it because I was the one who had signed the lease papers 3 months ago. I was the one who had argued that the monthly payments were too high, but Jamal had insisted he needed it for his image. Twin beams of light cut through the darkness, blinding me for a moment. The car screeched to a halt right in front of the building entrance, splashing dirty puddle water onto my legs. The butterfly door on the driver's side opened, and Jamal stepped out. He was still wearing that ridiculous electric blue suit, but now he looked even more manic, even more intoxicated by his own perceived power. He popped open a large black umbrella, shielding himself from the downpour. He did not look at me. He did not even acknowledge the woman he had been married to for 5 years, standing 5 feet away from him, shaking from the cold. He walked around the front of the car, his shoes splashing in the water I was standing in. He opened the passenger door with a flourish. Out stepped a woman I recognized instantly. Dominique. I had seen her on Instagram. She was an influencer, a model who posted photos of herself on yachts and in private jets. She was everything Courtney said I was not. High maintenance, flashy, expensive. She wore a white bodycon dress that looked like it had been painted on, and heels so high they looked like weapons. Her hair was perfect despite the humidity. Jamal immediately extended the umbrella over her, leaving himself partially exposed, but keeping her completely dry. "Careful, baby," he cooed, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Do not get your shoes wet." They walked toward the entrance, huddled together under the black canopy of the umbrella. I was invisible to them, a ghost haunting the sidewalk, but I would not let them pass without acknowledging me. "Jamal." I called out, my voice raspy. He stopped. He looked at me with annoyance, like I was a beggar asking for change. "Still here, Simone? You really have no pride, do you?" Dominique looked at me then. Her eyes raked over my wet hair, my ruined dress, my shivering form. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "Is this her?" she asked, her voice high and girlish. "The ex. She looks like a drowned rat." Jamal laughed, pulling Dominique closer. "Ignore her, babe. She is just the past. You are the future." Dominique giggled, and then she did something that stopped my heart. She placed a hand on her stomach. It was a deliberate, performative gesture. She rubbed her flat belly in slow, possessive circles, her eyes locked on mine. "We have to be careful, Jamal," she said loud enough for me to hear over the rain. "Stress isn't good for the baby." The baby! The world tilted on its axis. The rain felt suddenly freezing. "Come on," Jamal said, guiding her toward the door. "Let us get upstairs." I ordered champagne and strawberries. They brushed past me, the umbrella bumping my shoulder. I stood there paralyzed. He had locked me out of my home. He had stolen my money. And now he was replacing me with a younger model carrying the child he had claimed he never wanted with me. The betrayal was complete. But as I watched the elevator doors close on their laughing faces, I felt something shift deep inside my chest. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, burning fury. He thought he had won. He thought he had everything. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor and I was holding the lever. I stepped directly into the path of the McLaren. The headlights blinded me, but I did not care. I slammed my flat palms onto the hood of the car, the metal slick with rain. The engine revved aggressively, a warning growl, but I planted my feet in the rising water. I was not moving. Not until he heard me. Not until he acknowledged the theft of my life. Jamal honked the horn long and loud, the sound echoing off the high-rise buildings. When he realized I was not going to budge, he threw the car into park and kicked the door open. He stormed out, the umbrella forgotten, leaving Dominique inside the dry leather interior. "Are you crazy?" he shouted, his voice cracking over the sound of the storm. "Move out of the way, Simone, or I swear I will run you over." "You are not going anywhere in this car, Jamal," I screamed, my voice raw and tearing at my throat. "This is my car. My name is on the lease. My bank account has been drained every single month for 3 years to pay for this monstrosity while you sat on the couch waiting for a miracle." He laughed, a harsh barking sound that made my skin crawl. "It is my car now. Everything is mine now. Possession is 9/10 of the law, Simone." I took a step closer, getting right in his face, ignoring the rain plastering my hair to my skull. "It is not just the car, Jamal. What about the tuition? What about Leo? I paid $15,000 last week so your son would not get kicked out of private school. I paid for his braces. I paid for his summer camp. I raised him while you ignored him. I put a roof over your head and food in your stomach and clothes on your back for 5 years. I built this life. You just leached off of it." Jamal's face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a thick roll of cash, rubber banded together. It was the cash he had taken from our emergency safe before he locked me out. "Is that what this is about?" he sneered, looking down at me like I was something he had stepped in. "You want to be reimbursed. You want a check for your services." He broke the rubber band with a snap. He did not hand me the money. He threw it. Hundreds of dollars in $20 bills exploded into the air, fluttering down into the mud and oil-stained puddles around my feet. They soaked up the dirty water instantly. There he spat, pointing at the wet money. "Consider that your back pay. Consider it your salary. You were never a wife, Simone. You were a glorified nanny and a maid. You did your job. You kept me comfortable until my ship came in. Well, the ship is here and you are fired. So pick up your tip and get out of my way." He turned back to the car where Dominique was watching through the window, her nose wrinkled in distaste as she looked at me standing in the debris. "Move it, Simone," he called over his shoulder as he grabbed the door handle. Dominique has a sensitive nose. She is allergic to the smell of desperation and poverty. And right now, you reek of both. He got back in and slammed the butterfly door shut. The engine roared to life. I stepped aside, not because I was afraid, but because I was done begging. I watched the taillights fade into the rainy night, the wet bills sticking to my shoes. He called it poverty. I called it evidence. He had just admitted to financial abuse in the middle of the street. And I was going to make him pay back every single cent with interest. I walked for what felt like miles in the rain before a taxi finally took pity on me. By the time I knocked on Lisa's door, I was shivering uncontrollably, my dress ruined and my spirit crushed. Lisa opened the door and her face crumbled. She did not ask questions. She just pulled me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and handed me a mug of hot tea. She was a public defender used to seeing people at their lowest. But seeing her strong, organized best friend broken like this shook her. I told her everything through chattering teeth. The divorce papers, the pearls, the lockout, the car. Lisa listened, her lawyer brain already working behind her sympathetic eyes. "You stay here as long as you need," she said firmly. "We will figure this out in the morning. But first, we need to secure your assets before he does anything else." I barely slept. As soon as the bank opened the next morning, I was there, still wearing borrowed clothes from Lisa. I walked up to the teller, a woman named Brenda who had known me and Winston for years. "I need to make a withdrawal," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I slipped my debit card into the machine. It beeped. "Card error." I tried again. "Invalid card." My heart began to race. Brenda looked at her screen, then up at me, her expression pained. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Winston," she said quietly. "Your card has been reported lost and cancelled." Cancelled. I did not report it. I tried to hand her my credit card. "Try this one." She shook her head without even taking it. "I cannot run it, Simone. Your husband called this morning. He reported all cards in your name as stolen, and the joint checking account, the savings. I need access to my money, Brenda. I have nothing." She turned the screen so I could not see it, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "It is frozen. All of it. There is a court order pending for asset preservation, filed by a Vernon Winston. Uncle Vernon. Jamal's uncle, the crooked lawyer who had helped Winston with shady deals back in the day, and now was helping Jamal destroy me. He had moved fast, faster than I thought possible. They had locked me out of the house, taken my car, and now they had cut off my lifeline. I was standing in the middle of the bank penniless. I had worked for 5 years building that savings account. I had put every bonus, every extra paycheck into it while Jamal bought shoes and video games, and now he had locked it away with a single phone call. I walked out of the bank into the bright morning sun feeling dizzy. I reached for my phone to call Lisa but stopped. My service was cut. No signal. Of course. The phone plan was under the family bundle. He had been thorough. He wanted me broken. He wanted me crawling back to beg. He wanted me to starve. I stood on the sidewalk gripping my useless phone and realized this was not just a divorce. It was a siege. He thought he had taken my weapons. He did not know I was the one who designed the fortress he was trying to lock me out of. I tried to bury myself in blueprints. My desk at the architecture firm was usually my sanctuary, a place where lines and angles made sense even when life did not. But today the open plan office felt like a fishbowl. My colleagues were whispering. I could feel their eyes on my back. They had seen the social media posts. Courtney's lies were spreading like wildfire. I kept my head down, focusing on the structural integrity of the community center I was designing. If I just kept working, maybe I could hold the pieces of my life together. "Excuse me, is there a Simone Winston here?" The voice was loud, booming across the quiet hum of the office. I froze. A man in a generic uniform stood at the reception desk holding a thick manila envelope. He was not a regular courier. He looked like a process server. "I am Simone," I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy. He walked over to my desk, not caring that the entire design team was watching. He thrust the envelope into my hands. "You have been served, ma'am. Sign here." I signed the digital pad, my signature a shaky scrawl. As he turned to leave, I looked down at the return address. Winston and Associates Legal Counsel. Uncle Vernon. My hands trembled as I ripped open the seal. I expected divorce papers. I expected a notice to vacate the penthouse. I did not expect this. It was a demand letter. But it was not just legal jargon. It was a detailed, itemized list of every single gift I had received in 5 years of marriage. Item 1. Diamond stud earrings, 2020. Item 2. Vintage Chanel handbag, black, 2021. Item 3. Gold tennis bracelet, 2022. The list went on and on. They wanted everything back, every birthday present, every anniversary gift, even the small token gifts Winston had given me for Christmas. The letter claimed these items were family assets purchased with Winston funds and therefore subject to repossession. They were trying to strip me bare. They wanted to erase every trace that I had ever been a Winston. But the next paragraph was worse. It was a threat written in cold legal ink. Furthermore, should Ms. Simone Winston seek spousal support or alimony of any kind, Mr. Jamal Winston is prepared to file a countersuit for breach of fiduciary duty and financial exploitation. I gasped loud enough that my deskmate jumped. Financial exploitation. They were accusing me of stealing from Winston. Me, the woman who sat by his bed every night. The woman who used her own salary to pay for his private nurses when Jamal claimed the trust was tied up. The woman Winston called his only real child. The cruelty was breathtaking. They were weaponizing my care for a dying man against me. They were telling me that if I asked for a single dime of the money I was legally entitled to, they would destroy my reputation and paint me as a monster who preyed on a sick old man. I looked up. My boss was standing in the doorway of his office watching me. His face was unreadable, but I saw the disappointment there. I saw the liability I had become. The envelope felt toxic in my hands. Jamal did not just want a divorce. He wanted to rewrite history. He wanted to turn my love into a crime. I shoved the papers into my bag, my face burning with shame. They thought this would break me. They thought fear would make me sign their waiver and disappear into the night. They were wrong. They had just given me the weapon I needed to burn their whole kingdom down. I sat at my desk trying to process the legal threat when my phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. Within seconds it was vibrating constantly, dancing across the laminate surface, like a possessed thing. I picked it up. A notification from Instagram. Courtney Winston is live. The title read, "The Truth About My Family's Tragedy." I tapped the screen. There she was. Courtney sat in her pristine living room, the ring light reflecting in her teary blue eyes. She wore a modest white sweater, looking like a grieving angel. She sniffled, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "Guys, I have been holding this in for so long," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. "You know my father-in-law passed away recently. We are all devastated. But what hurts the most is the betrayal. We found out that Simone, his daughter-in-law, the woman we welcomed into our home, was stealing from him." I gasped, dropping the phone on the desk. Stealing. I spent my own money on his medication. I skipped meals to pay for his physical therapy. Courtney continued on the screen. While he was dying, she was transferring money out of his accounts. And that is not even the worst part. She was cheating on my brother-in-law, Jamal. She was bringing men into the house while Winston was upstairs taking his last breaths. It breaks my heart to say this, but she used our family. She is a predator. Lies, vile, poisonous lies. I watched in horror as the viewer count climbed. 5,000, 10,000. The comments were scrolling so fast I could barely read them. What a monster. Lock her up, poor Jamal. I looked up from the screen and realized the office had gone quiet. Too quiet. I turned around. My colleagues were huddled in small groups, whispering. When they saw me looking, they scattered, eyes diverting to their screens. Even Linda, my work best friend, looked down at her keyboard, biting her lip, refusing to meet my gaze. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. I walked toward the break room, needing water, needing air. As I passed the glass-walled conference room, I saw my boss standing with two of the senior partners. They were gathered around a tablet. They were watching Courtney. They looked up as I passed. The disgust on their faces was unmistakable. It did not matter that I had been the top architect for 3 years. It did not matter that I had never taken a sick day. In their eyes, I was now a thief and an adulterer, a liability. Courtney had not just attacked me. She had nuked my reputation. She knew exactly what she was doing. In the court of public opinion, I was already guilty. I retreated to the bathroom, locking the stall door as the tears finally came hot and angry. They wanted to strip me of my assets. Now they were stripping me of my name. But Courtney made a mistake. She thought destroying my reputation would make me hide. She did not realize that when you have nothing left to lose, you have nothing left to fear, and a woman with no fear is the most dangerous enemy of all. I did not have long to cry in the bathroom stall. A knock on the door startled me, followed by the voice of the office manager. "Simone, Mr. Reynolds needs to see you in his office immediately." I splashed cold water on my face, trying to scrub away the evidence of my breakdown. I walked to the corner office, my head held high despite the whispers trailing behind me like smoke. Mr. Reynolds did not ask me to sit. He stood behind his desk, looking out at the city skyline. He looked uncomfortable, like a man about to kick a puppy. "Simone," he began without turning around. "We have seen the video. The allegations are serious. They are lies," I interrupted, my voice trembling. Courtney is lying. I have proof. He turned then his face hard. It does not matter, Simone. In our business, perception is reality. The Winston family is not just your in-laws. They are the primary investors for the downtown revitalization project. They are 50% of our current billing. He picked up a folder from his desk. Winston Enterprises called 10 minutes ago. They threatened to pull the contract if we continue to employ someone who is actively damaging their family reputation. So that was it. My years of dedication, my late nights, my award-winning designs, all erased because of a lie and a rich family's ego. I am being fired because of a viral video, I asked, the injustice choking me. I am sorry, Simone. We cannot risk the contract. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. Your access to the server has already been revoked. The walk back to my desk was the longest of my life. A security guard, a man I had shared coffee with every morning for 3 years, walked 2 steps behind me like I was a criminal. The office was silent. No one looked at me. No one offered a sympathetic smile. I was radioactive. I grabbed a cardboard box. I packed the photo of my mother, my architecture license, the award I won last year for the community library project. I left the plants. I left the expensive pens I had bought with my own money. I just wanted to get out. I walked to the elevator, the box heavy in my arms. As the doors closed, I saw Linda watching me, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed, "I am sorry." I stepped out onto the busy sidewalk and the reality hit me like a physical blow. 48 hours ago, I was a wife. I was a respected architect. I had a home. I had a future. Now I stood on the concrete curb with a cardboard box and a maxed-out credit card. I had no husband, no home, no money, no job. And thanks to Courtney, I had no name. The city moved around me, loud and indifferent. I was a ghost in my own life. They had stripped me bare. They had taken everything they thought made me who I was. But as I hailed a cab with my last $20, I realized they had made a fatal error by taking everything they had left me with nothing to lose, and that made me free. The cab ride ended at Washington Park. It was the only place I could afford. I sat on a weathered wooden bench, the city skyline looming over me like a jagged promise I had broken. I pulled a sandwich from the bottom of my bag. It was stale, purchased hours ago from a vending machine when I thought my life was just having a bad morning, not a total collapse. I took a bite. It tasted like sawdust and regret. I looked up. Directly across the park, rising above the tree line, was the Centennial Tower. It was sleek, modern, and beautiful. Its glass facade reflected the setting sun, turning the building into a pillar of fire. I knew every inch of that building. I knew the exact angle of the atrium roof. I knew the load-bearing capacity of the support beams on the 40th floor. I had designed it. It was my first major project, the one that had put my name on the map. Now I was sitting on a park bench eating a dollar sandwich, looking at a monument to my own talent that I was no longer allowed to claim. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Inside, tucked behind my driver's license, was a business card. Simone Winston, Senior Architect, Winston and Associates. The card was crisp and heavy cream-colored with gold lettering. It was a symbol of everything I had achieved, everything I had built. And now it was a lie. I was not a senior architect. I was unemployed. I was not a Winston. I was a pariah. I ran my thumb over the raised letters one last time. Then I ripped the card in half. The sound was small, barely audible over the noise of the park, but it felt like a bone snapping. I tore the halves into quarters, then eighths, until the card was nothing but a pile of confetti in my palm. I opened my hand and let the pieces fall. The wind caught them, scattering my identity into the grass. Maybe I should just give up. The thought whispered in my mind, seductive and terrifying. Maybe I should just call Uncle Vernon, sign the papers, take the settlement if there even was one, move back to my hometown and live in a small apartment and pretend none of this ever happened. It would be easier. It would be safe. I was tired, so tired of fighting, so tired of being the only one holding the line. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Uncle Vernon's contact. I could end the pain right now. I could surrender. One call, just one call, and the war would be over. I would lose everything, but at least I would not have to be afraid anymore. I stared at the screen, the number blurring through my tears. I was about to press call when the phone vibrated in my hand. It was not Vernon. It was a number I did not recognize. I hesitated. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something, a tiny spark of instinct, made me answer. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice raw. "Is this Simone Winston?" The voice was old, gravelly, and unfamiliar. But it wasn't hostile. It sounded like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. It sounded like destiny. The phone felt hot against my ear. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the confusion swirling in my mind. Who was this man? Why did he invoke Winston's name? "Yes, I am Simone," I said, my voice trembling. "Who is this?" "I am Arthur Henderson," the voice replied. It was calm, steady, and carried the weight of authority. I was Winston's personal attorney, not for the family business, for his private affairs. I frowned. Private affairs. Winston told me everything, or so I thought. He told me about his regrets, about his fears, about how disappointed he was in Jamal. He never mentioned an Arthur Henderson. "I do not understand," I said, clutching the phone tighter. "Uncle Vernon handles all the legal matters. He is the executor." Henderson chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Vernon handles what Winston wanted the family to see. He handles the public face. I handle the truth. The truth." The word hung in the air, heavy with promise and danger. "Why are you calling me now?" I asked. "Why wait until my life is in ruins?" "Because Winston gave me strict instructions," Henderson said. "He told me to wait. He told me to watch. He said, 'Do not call her unless she has lost everything, unless they have stripped her bare.'" He paused, and I could hear the rustle of papers on the other end. "He knew this would happen, Simone. He knew Jamal would betray you. He knew Estelle would turn on you. He knew they would try to break you. And he wanted to make sure that when you hit rock bottom, you would have a ladder to climb out." Tears welled in my eyes again, but these were different. They were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief. Winston had not abandoned me. Even from the grave, he was looking out for me. "I need you to meet me," Henderson continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not at my office. It is too risky. Vernon has eyes everywhere. Meet me at the Rusty Spoon on 4th Street. In 1 hour. Come alone. And Simone, tell no one." The Rusty Spoon. It was a greasy spoon diner on the edge of town, a place where truck drivers and construction workers ate breakfast at 3 in the afternoon. It was the last place anyone would look for a high-powered attorney or a disgraced architect. "I will be there," I whispered. "Good," Henderson said. "And Simone, bring your courage. You are going to need it." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment, the screen black and silent. The wind picked up, scattering the remnants of my torn business card across the grass. I watched them go, small white flakes disappearing into the green. My old life was gone. My old identity was gone. But something new was taking its place. Something dangerous. Something powerful. I stood up, brushing the crumbs from my lap. I was hungry. I was tired. I was broke. But for the first time in 48 hours, I was not hopeless. Winston had left me a lifeline, and I was going to grab it with both hands. I walked toward the park exit, my steps faster now, more purposeful. The Rusty Spoon was 5 miles away. I did not have money for a cab, but I had legs, and I had a meeting with destiny. The Rusty Spoon smelled of burnt coffee and old grease. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. The vinyl booths were cracked and taped over with gray duct tape, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing flicker. I felt ridiculous walking in wearing my ruined designer dress, my hair still damp from the rain. I looked like a refugee from a gala that had gone horribly wrong. I scanned the room. In the back corner booth sat a man who did not belong. He wore a gray wool coat that looked expensive but worn. He had a fedora on the table next to a cup of black coffee. He looked like a character from a noir film, out of time and out of place. But his eyes were sharp. They locked onto me the moment I stepped through the door. I walked over and slid into the booth opposite him. He did not smile. He did not offer a handshake. He just watched me with an intensity that made me squirm. "You look like hell, Simone," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "I feel like hell," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "You said you have answers. You said Winston sent you." Arthur Henderson took a slow sip of his coffee. Winston was a complicated man. He made a lot of money and he made a lot of enemies. But his biggest regret was his family. I frowned. He loved them. He gave them everything. He gave them money, Arthur corrected. He gave them access. But he knew what they were. He called them the vultures. He watched them, Simone, for years. He saw Jamal spending money he did not earn. He saw Trey and Courtney plotting in the corners of his parties. He saw Estelle treating the staff like dirt. And he saw you. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the sticky table. He saw you paying the bills when Jamal forgot. He saw you organizing his medications. He saw you sitting by his bed reading to him when he could barely hear. He knew you were the only one who was real, the only one who was not waiting for him to die so they could cash out. Tears pricked my eyes again. "I thought he was too sick to notice," I whispered. "I thought he was just grateful for the company." "He was sharp until the end," Arthur said. "And he was terrified. He was terrified that once he was gone they would eat you alive. He knew Jamal would discard you. He told me once that Jamal treats people like tissues. He uses them up and throws them away." I looked down at my hands. He was right. Arthur nodded. Winston knew Jamal would try to take everything. He knew Vernon would help him. Vernon has been cleaning up Jamal's messes for 20 years. DUIs, gambling debts, paternity suits. My head snapped up. Arthur's eyes were cold. "You did not know." "Of course not. Vernon made them go away." But Winston knew. And he knew that if he left his empire to Jamal, it would be gone in 5 years, wasted on cars and women and bad investments. So he made a plan, a failsafe. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a black envelope. It was thick and heavy, sealed with red wax. It looked ancient. It looked like a weapon. "This is not the will Vernon has," Arthur said, placing his hand over the envelope. "Vernon has the decoy. This is the real instrument. The Asset Protection Trust. Winston set it up 6 months ago. He moved the voting shares. He moved the real estate titles. He moved the liquid assets." I stared at the black envelope. "What does that mean?" "It means," Arthur said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face, "that Jamal inherited nothing but a title. The money, the power, the control. It is all locked inside this trust. And the trust has a trigger." He tapped the envelope with a manicured fingernail. "The trigger is divorce. If Jamal stayed married to you, he would have had an allowance, a generous one. But if he divorced you, if he cast you aside, then the power shifts. Shifts to whom?" I asked, my breath catching in my throat. Arthur slid the envelope across the table until it rested in front of me. "To the trustee. To the only person Winston trusted to do the right thing. To you, Simone." I stared at the black paper, terrified to touch it. "Me. You own it all," Arthur said, his voice hard. "The house, the cars, the company, even the shirt on Jamal's back. It all belongs to the trust, and you are the trust." He sat back, watching me process the information. "Winston gave you a sword, Simone. The question is, are you brave enough to swing it? I reached out and touched the black envelope. The paper was cold and textured like dragon skin. The red wax seal bore the Winston family crest, a lion holding a key. It felt heavier than paper should be. It felt like judgment. Go ahead, Arthur urged, his voice low. Open it. It is addressed to you. I broke the seal. The wax crumbled under my thumb. Inside were 20 pages of legal documents printed on thick ivory paper. The header read, "The Winston Asset Protection Trust." I scanned the first page, my eyes blurring over the legal jargon until I hit a paragraph highlighted in yellow marker. Clause 7b, the trigger event. In the event that the primary beneficiary, Jamal Winston, dissolves his marriage to Simone Winston by filing for divorce, abandoning the marital home, or engaging in public infidelity, the following provisions shall immediately take effect. I looked up at Arthur. What does this mean? Keep reading, he said, his eyes gleaming. I read on. Upon the occurrence of a trigger event, the primary beneficiary, Jamal Winston, shall be removed from all executive positions within Winston Enterprises. His access to all liquid assets, real estate holdings, and investment accounts shall be revoked. He shall be provided a monthly stipend equivalent to the federal minimum wage currently calculated at $2,000 per month. $2,000. Jamal spent that on lunch. And then the next paragraph, the one that made my breath hitch. Control of the trust, including all voting shares of Winston Enterprises and legal title to all real property, shall transfer immediately and irrevocably to the designated trustee. The trustee is named herein as Simone Winston. I dropped the papers on the table. My hands were shaking so hard I knocked over my water glass. Me. He left it to me. Not just the money, Arthur said, leaning back. The power. Winston knew Jamal would burn the company to the ground. He knew Trey would embezzle. He knew Courtney would spend until the accounts were dry. He needed a guardian. Someone who actually cared about the legacy, not just the lifestyle. But why wait? I asked, my voice trembling. Why not tell me this when he was alive? Because he wanted to give Jamal a chance, Arthur said, his voice sad. He wanted to believe his son would do the right thing. If Jamal had stayed married to you, if he had treated you with respect, the trust would have remained dormant. You would have managed it together. But Winston knew his son. He knew Jamal would choose greed over love. He knew Jamal would see the money and think he didn't need the woman who helped him get it. He tapped the document. This is not just a will, Simone. It is a test. And Jamal failed. I looked at the papers again. $570 million. The penthouse, the mansion, the company. It was all mine. Or rather, it was mine to control, mine to protect. So Jamal has nothing, I whispered. Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin. Jamal has exactly what he earned. Nothing. He is living in a house he does not own, driving a car he cannot pay for, spending money that does not exist. He thinks he is a king, but he is trespassing in your castle. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a pen. A heavy, expensive fountain pen. But there is a catch, he said, his tone turning serious. To activate the trust, you have to let him finish what he started. You have to let the divorce go through. You have to let him think he won. You have to sign the settlement agreement, giving up everything. Because the moment that judge bangs the gavel, the moment you are legally divorced, Clause 7b kicks in. He pushed the pen toward me. You have to play the victim one last time, Simone. You have to let him strip you bare. You have to let him gloat. Can you do that? Can you swallow your pride long enough to spring the trap? I thought about Courtney kicking my pearls. I thought about Jamal throwing money in the mud. I thought about Mama Estelle calling me a leech. I picked up the pen. The metal was cool in my hand. I can do it, I said, my voice steady. I will play the victim, and then I will play the executioner. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. I moved into Lisa's guest room, sleeping on a pull-out sofa, while Jamal lived in my penthouse. I wore my old clothes. I took the bus. I ate ramen noodles. I played the part of the destitute, abandoned wife perfectly. Arthur Henderson coached me every step of the way. We met in the back of the Rusty Spoon or in public parks, always careful to avoid being seen. He explained the strategy. It was simple but brutal. Let him win, Arthur said, stirring his black coffee. Let him take the furniture. Let him take the art. Let him drain the accounts. Every time he takes something, he digs his grave a little deeper. But the most important part was the waiver. Arthur had drafted a document, a waiver of spousal support and asset claim. It looked standard. It looked like something Vernon would write to protect Jamal's new fortune. But it had a double edge. It says that neither party claims any rights to the other's future assets, Arthur explained. Jamal will sign it because he thinks you have nothing. He thinks he is protecting his $570 million, but what he is actually doing is signing away his right to contest the trust once you take over. So I have to let him think I am defeated, I asked. You have to be invisible, Arthur said. You have to be so pathetic that he does not even see you as a threat. Let him gloat. Let him parade his new girlfriend around. The more comfortable he feels, the more careless he will be. It was hard. Harder than I thought. I had to watch from a distance as Jamal threw parties in the penthouse I designed. I had to see photos on social media of Courtney wearing my clothes. I had to read interviews where Jamal talked about his vision for the company. A vision that was nothing more than spending money he didn't have. But I held my tongue. I went to the mediation meetings with Vernon and sat silently while they insulted me. We are offering you a one-time settlement of $5,000, Vernon said, sliding a check across the polished conference table. Considering you brought nothing into this marriage, it is more than generous. $5,000. It wouldn't even cover the deposit on a new apartment. Take it, Arthur whispered, nudging my foot under the table. I looked at Jamal. He was leaning back in his chair, checking his watch board. He didn't even look at me. Okay, I said, my voice small. I will take it. Vernon smiled a shark-like grin. Smart girl. Just sign here. And here. And here. I signed. I signed away my right to the house. I signed away my right to the car. I signed away my dignity. And as I signed, I watched Jamal. He was texting probably Dominique. He looked so happy. So secure. He thought he had won the lottery. He didn't know he was signing his own eviction notice. Good, Vernon said, snatching the papers away. The divorce will be finalized in 10 days. Until then, stay away from the family. Stay away from the press. And for God's sake, buy some new clothes. You look like a vagrant. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of the office, my head down, shoulders slumped. But the moment the elevator doors closed, I straightened up. I looked at my reflection in the metal doors. I didn't see a victim. I saw a hunter lying in wait. 10 days. Just 10 days, and the trap would spring. While I sat in a cramped guest room counting pennies, Jamal was living in a fever dream of wealth. He did not wait for the probate court to clear the estate. He did not wait for the funds to actually hit his account. He lived like the money was already burning a hole in his pocket. He believed the world was finally bending to his will. He walked into the most exclusive jeweler in Atlanta, with Dominique on his arm. She wore a white dress that hugged every curve and pointed at a 10-carat yellow diamond ring that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Jamal did not even ask the price. He slapped a platinum credit card on the glass counter. It was a card he had opened that morning based on his projected net worth, a line of credit extended by a bank that thought they were betting on a sure thing. The sales clerk hesitated, looking at the card, then at Jamal. Sir, this is a $500,000 transaction. We might need to verify the funds. Jamal laughed, a loud, arrogant sound that made the other customers turn and stare. Verify it. Call the bank. Tell them Jamal Winston is buying it. Tell them my father just left me $500 million. Tell them I am good for it. He was high on the fumes of his future fortune. He signed the receipt with a flourish, not caring about the interest rate or the payment schedule. He slipped the ring onto Dominique's finger. She squealed and kissed him, posing for a selfie right there in the store, captioning it, "Future Mrs. Billionaire." From the jewelry store, they went house hunting. Not for a house, really, for a palace. They toured a 20,000 square foot estate in Buckhead with 12 bedrooms and a 10-car garage. The real estate agent, a shark in a silk suit, smelled blood in the water. "It is listed at 15 million, the agent said, smoothing his tie. "But we have other interested parties. You would need to move fast." "I will take it," Jamal said without blinking. "I will put down a non-refundable deposit today, $1 million. He wrote a check against an account that was currently empty, counting on a bridge loan Uncle Vernon had hastily arranged. A loan based entirely on the expectation of the inheritance. He was leveraging a future that did not exist. He was building a castle on a foundation of sand. Dominique ran through the empty halls, spinning in circles, her laughter echoing off the marble walls. "This is it, baby," she cried. "This is where we will raise our son, our little prince." Jamal watched her, his chest swelling with pride. He saw himself as the patriarch, the mogul, the king. He saw a future of endless luxury and power. He did not see the cliff edge he was sprinting toward. He did not see the debt piling up like storm clouds. He did not see that every dollar he spent was a tightening noose around his neck. He ordered custom furniture from Italy. He booked a private island for their honeymoon. He hired a staff of 10. He was spending millions he did not have, convinced that the universe owed him this life. He was wrong. The universe was just waiting to collect the debt. Jamal sat on the Italian leather sofa in the penthouse, nursing a glass of 50-year-old scotch he had charged to a tab that was rapidly reaching astronomical heights. The city lights of Atlanta sprawled out below him, a glittering kingdom that he believed he finally ruled. But heavy lies the crown, or in Jamal's case, heavy lies the silence of an empty bank account waiting for a transfer that was taking too long. Trey and Courtney sat opposite him. They did not look worried about the delay. They looked like cats who had found an unguarded bowl of cream. Courtney leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Jamal, honey," she purred. "You know we are so proud of you. Getting rid of Simone was the best thing you ever did. She was holding you back. She thought small. She was happy with a sedan and a savings account. You are meant for jets and empires." Trey nodded, swirling his drink. "That is exactly it. Dad was great, but he was old school. He made money the slow way, brick by brick. Boring. You, Jamal, you are a visionary. You deserve to make your mark. Not just spend Dad's money, but double it. Triple it. Be the first billionaire Winston." Jamal sat up straighter. The alcohol and the flattery were a potent mix. A billionaire. He liked the sound of that. He liked the idea of being more than just the son who waited for his father to die. "What are you talking about, Trey?" Trey pulled out his phone and pulled up a graph that showed a green line shooting almost vertically upward. "It is called Omnicoin. It is not just crypto, Jamal. It is the future of decentralized luxury banking. My friend in Dubai tipped me off. It is about to launch publicly next week. The pre-sale buy-in is right now." He tapped the screen aggressively. "If you put in 5 million today, conservative estimates say it will be worth 50 million by Friday. By next month, 100 million. It is a guaranteed rocket ship." Jamal stared at the graph. His eyes glazed over the technical details, but the numbers stuck. 50 million in a week. That was power. That was freedom. "That is incredible," he breathed. "It is a game changer," Courtney added softly. "Imagine the look on everyone's faces. Imagine Simone's face when she sees you are not just living off inheritance, but you are a financial genius. You would not just be Winston's son anymore. You would be Jamal the mogul, the man who outdid his father in a single week." That hit him right in the insecurities. He had spent his whole life in Winston's shadow, terrified he was nothing more than a disappointment. This was his chance to prove them all wrong. To prove he was smarter, faster, better. "But there is a problem," Jamal said, his excitement deflating. "The probate courts are slow. I do not have access to the cash yet. Uncle Vernon says it could be weeks before the accounts thaw." Trey exchanged a quick, dark look with Courtney. That is the thing about being rich. Trey said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You do not need cash in hand. You have assets. You have the will. There are private lenders who understand how these things work. They will lend you the seed money against the inheritance. You mean a loan shark? Jamal asked, a flicker of fear cutting through the haze. Not a shark, Courtney corrected, smooth as silk. An investor. A silent partner. You borrow $5 million, you pay it back next week with a little interest, and you keep the $45 million in profit. It is simple math, Jamal. It is what real businessmen do. Simone would be too scared to do it. But you are not Simone. Jamal looked at the graph. He looked at the city below him. He imagined the headlines. Jamal Winston Crypto King. He imagined Dominique's adoration. He imagined rubbing Simone's nose in his success. Set it up, he said, slamming his glass down on the table. I am in. I am going to show this city what a real Winston can do. Trey smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile full of teeth. Consider it done, brother. You are going to be a legend. Jamal leaned back, closing his eyes, dreaming of billions. He did not see Trey text someone under the table. He did not know that the crypto project was a shell company owned by Courtney's cousin. He did not know he was not investing. He was being harvested. The meeting took place in the basement of a cigar lounge in downtown Atlanta, the kind of place where the air was thick with smoke and unspoken threats. Jamal sat in a velvet armchair trying to look comfortable, but his hands were sweating. Opposite him sat Big Sal, a man whose reputation was whispered in fearful tones across the city. Sal did not wear a suit. He wore a track jacket and a gold chain that looked heavy enough to anchor a boat. He was flanked by two men who looked like they chewed rocks for breakfast. Trey had arranged the meeting, but he was suspiciously quiet now, sitting in the corner and letting Jamal do the talking. Jamal placed the black leather portfolio on the table. Inside was the certified copy of Winston's will, the one Uncle Vernon had prepared, the one that said Jamal inherited everything. I need $5 million, Jamal said, his voice tight. Just for a week. The probate court is dragging its feet, but as you can see, the money is there. $570 million, it is a sure thing. Sal picked up the document. He did not read it. He just weighed it in his hand as if judging the value of the paper itself. A sure thing, Sal repeated, his voice a low rumble. I like sure things. But I also like insurance. You are asking for a lot of cash, Jamal. Cash is king. Paper is just paper until the bank clears it. It will clear, Jamal insisted, leaning forward. It is Winston money. Everyone knows my father was good for it. Your father was, Sal agreed. But you are not your father. You are the son who spends too much. I hear things, Jamal. I hear about the house in Buckhead. I hear about the ring. I hear you are spending money like water before you even have it in the bucket. Jamal bristled. I am investing. I am building an empire. This $5 million is just seed money. I will pay you back double. $10 million next week. Sal laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. $10 million. You are generous with money you do not have. Okay, I will do it. $5 million cash today. But the terms are strict. $10 million back in 7 days. If you are late, the interest is 10%. Per day. 10% a day. Jamal did the math in his head. That was $500,000 a day. It was insanity. It was predatory. But then he thought about the cryptograph. He thought about the $50 million he would make. He thought about the look on Simone's face when he became a self-made billionaire. Deal? Jamal said, extending his hand. Sal did not shake it. He snapped his fingers, and one of his men placed a metal briefcase on the table. He opened it, revealing stacks of $100 bills. There it is, Sal said. But Jamal understand one thing. I do not care about courts. I do not care about probate. I do not care about your father's legacy. If you do not pay me next Friday, I will not sue you. I will not send a letter. I will come to your new house. I will find your pretty new girlfriend. And I will take what is mine in flesh if I have to. Do we understand each other? A cold shiver ran down Jamal's spine. He looked at the money. It looked like freedom. It looked like power. He looked at Sal's dead eyes. He realized he was not making a deal. He was signing a contract with the devil, but he was too far gone to stop. He was chasing the high. We understand each other, Jamal said, grabbing the briefcase. Next Friday, you will have your money. He stood up and walked out, feeling the weight of the cash in his hand. He felt invincible. He felt like a king. He did not know he had just sold his soul for fool's gold. He did not know that the clock had already started ticking and it was counting down to his destruction. The penthouse smelled different now. It used to smell like lavender, and my architecture drafts a mix of clean laundry and graphite. Now it smelled of cloying vanilla perfume and stale champagne. I punched in the temporary access code Arthur had wrangled from Vernon for this 1-hour window. I had 60 minutes to retrieve my birth certificate, my passport, and the few personal sketches I had left behind. I walked into the foyer. The place was a wreck. Takeout boxes were piled on the bespoke quartz island I had designed. Expensive coats were thrown over the chairs. It looked like a fraternity house, not the home of a billionaire. Well, 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 look who it is. Jamal was lounging on the sofa, his feet up on the coffee table. He was wearing a silk robe that was open to his waist, revealing a gold chain that was thick enough to be a leash. Dominique was curled up next to him, scrolling through her phone. She was wearing one of my old cashmere sweaters, but she had cut the sleeves off, turning it into a crop top. The sight made my stomach turn. "What are you doing here, Simone?" Jamal asked, not bothering to sit up. "Come to beg for scraps. Or did you just miss the view?" "I am here for my papers, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice level. "I have a court order." He laughed. "A court order? You and your little pieces of paper. You are so boring, Simone. That is why I left you. You have no imagination, no spark." Dominique giggled, looking up from her phone. "She is kind of plain, isn't she, baby? You were right. She looks like a librarian." Jamal squeezed her shoulder. "A librarian who lived in a palace she did not deserve. Look at Dominique Simone. Look at her. She is beautiful. She is young. She is pregnant with my son. She is everything you could never be. She is a trophy. You were just a participation award." The insults bounced off me like pebbles against a tank. I walked past them to the office. My hands were steady as I gathered my files. I found my grandmother's ring in the back of a drawer where I had hidden it. I slipped it into my pocket. As I walked back through the living room, Jamal stood up, blocking my path. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you," he said, swirling his drink. "You are going to leave here and go back to your sad little life. You are going to watch me on TV. You are going to see me on the cover of magazines. And you are going to know that you had it all and you lost it because you were too boring to keep a king interested." I stopped. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his eyes, the desperation he was trying to drown in expensive scotch. I saw the tremor in his hand. "You think you are a king, Jamal?" I asked softly. "I am a king," he shouted, his face flushing. "I have the money. I have the girl. I have the world." I smiled. It was a slow, dangerous smile, the kind Arthur had taught me. It was the smile of someone who knows the end of the movie. "Dominique is beautiful," I agreed, looking at the girl who was now watching us with narrowed eyes. "She is very expensive, too." "I hope you can afford her." "I can afford anything," he sneered. "I have $500 million coming." "Coming," I repeated. "But not here yet. Be careful, Jamal. Castles built on air tend to fall very hard when the wind changes." He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me. "Are you threatening me?" No, I said, stepping around him. I am warning you. Enjoy the champagne, Jamal. Enjoy the view. Enjoy the girl. Because the clock is ticking. And when it strikes midnight, you are going to find out that you are not the prince. You are just the pumpkin. I walked to the door, not looking back. Crazy butch, Jamal shouted after me. Get out. We do not need you. We are going to be legends. I closed the door, cutting off his voice. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence. I checked my watch. 48 hours. In 48 hours, the divorce would be final. In 48 hours, Clause 7B would activate. In 48 hours, the legend of Jamal Winston would end, and the reign of Simone would begin. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a cold, sterile place designed to reduce human lives to stacks of paperwork. I sat alone at the respondent's table, my hands folded in my lap, trying to look small, trying to look defeated. Across the aisle, Jamal sat surrounded by a phalanx of legal sharks. Uncle Vernon was there, looking like a well-fed vulture in a three-piece suit. Jamal was leaning back in his chair, checking his phone, looking bored. He wore another new suit, this one a charcoal gray that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. The judge entered, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked at the packed courtroom, then at the two parties. State your names for the record, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Jamal Winston, petitioner. Vernon boomed, standing up as if he were announcing a heavyweight champion, and representing him, Vernon Winston, senior partner at Winston & Associates, Simone Winston. Respondent, I said softly, not standing up. Representing myself. The judge frowned over her glasses. You have no counsel, Mrs. Winston. This is a high-asset divorce case. Are you sure you want to proceed without representation? I am sure, Your Honor, I said, keeping my eyes on the table. I just want this over with. Vernon smirked. He walked over to my table, carrying a thick document bound in blue paper. He dropped it in front of me with a heavy thud. This is the settlement agreement, Simone, he said, loud enough for the back row to hear. It states that you waive all rights to alimony. You waive all rights to marital assets, including the penthouse, the cars, and any future earnings of Mr. Winston. You leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, which is zero. He leaned in close, his cologne overpowering. Sign it and we walk away. Do not sign it and I will bury you in litigation for the next 10 years. I will sue you for the cost of the paper clips you used in your office. Do you understand me? I looked up at him. I saw the greed in his eyes. I saw the arrogance. He thought I was weak. He thought I was broken. He had no idea I was holding the match that would burn his world down. I understand, I whispered. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I did not hesitate. I flipped to the last page. Jamal watched me, a cruel smile playing on his lips. That is a good girl, Simone, he called out from his table. Know your place. I pressed the pen to the paper. The scratch of the nib sounded loud in the quiet room. I signed my name. S-I-M-O-N-E. With every loop of the letters, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. With every stroke, I was locking the cage door behind him. I handed the document back to Vernon. He snatched it, looking at the signature as if checking for a trick. It is done, he announced triumphantly, turning to the judge. The respondent has waived all claims. We ask for an immediate dissolution of marriage. The judge looked at me one last time. Mrs. Winston, are you absolutely certain? You are walking away from a significant estate. You are leaving with nothing. I looked at the judge. I looked at Jamal, who was high-fiving Trey in the gallery. I looked at Vernon, who was already packing his briefcase. I am certain, Your Honor. I said, my voice clear and steady. I do not want his money. I just want my freedom. The judge sighed and picked up her gavel. Very well. The settlement is approved. The divorce is granted. You are no longer husband and wife. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. It sounded like a gunshot, It sounded like a starter pistol. Jamal cheered. He actually cheered in the courtroom. He jumped up and hugged Vernon. "We did it," he shouted. "We won. I am free, I am rich, and she is nothing." They laughed loud, braying sounds of victory. They clapped each other on the back, celebrating their conquest. They did not look at me. Why would they? I was just the loser. I was just the discarded wife. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse. I did not look back at them. I walked down the center aisle, my steps silent on the carpet. As I pushed open the double doors, I heard Jamal say one last thing. "Drinks are on me, boys. We are going to celebrate." I smiled as I stepped into the hallway. "Yes, Jamal, celebrate. Drink your expensive scotch. Toast to your freedom. Because you have just triggered Clause 7B. You have just activated the trust. And you have just handed me the keys to the kingdom." The sound of the gavel striking the wood block was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It echoed through the high-ceilinged courtroom like a thunderclap, marking the end of a storm. "The marriage between Jamal Winston and Simone Winston is hereby dissolved," the judge declared, closing the file with a definitive thud. "You are both free to go." Free. The word hung in the air. For Jamal, it meant he was free to spend money he did not have and marry a woman who only loved his wallet. For me, it meant something entirely different. It meant the shackles were off. It meant the game was officially afoot. Jamal did not wait for the judge to leave the bench. He jumped up, fists pumping in the air like he had just scored a touchdown. "Yes," he shouted, turning to high-five Uncle Vernon. "We did it. We are free. The dead weight is gone." Vernon laughed, clapping Jamal on the back. "Congratulations, my boy. You are a single man, and a very, very rich one. Now we can finally access the accounts without her interference." They were celebrating their own execution, and they did not even know it. I watched them for a moment longer, etching the image into my mind. I wanted to remember exactly what they looked like in this moment of supreme arrogance. I wanted to remember the way Jamal's suit strained across his shoulders as he hugged Trey. I wanted to remember the greedy glint in Vernon's eyes, because the next time I saw them, that joy would be turned to ash. I stood up silently. I did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say to these people. I picked up my purse and turned my back on the celebration. "Hey, Simone," Jamal called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do not be too sad. Maybe I will send you a check once the millions clear. You know, for old time's sake. Buy yourself a cat or something." The gallery erupted in laughter. Even the bailiff cracked a smile. They all thought it was hilarious. The billionaire kicking the poor ex-wife while she was down. I paused at the double doors. I did not turn around. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing my face. I just pushed the doors open and stepped out into the cool, quiet hallway. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of their laughter. The silence of the corridor was heavy with anticipation. My heart was beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. Thump, 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 like a war drum. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I unlocked the screen and opened my messages. Arthur Henderson's name was at the top of the list. I typed 5 words. Just 5 words to bring down an empire. It is done. Execute 7B. I pressed send. The little swoosh sound of the message delivering felt louder than the gavel. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. It was the sound of a guillotine blade falling. Almost instantly, 3 dots appeared on the screen. Henderson was typing. Understood. The board meeting is scheduled for 1 hour from now. See you there, Madam Trustee? I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that felt foreign on my face. Madam Trustee. It had a nice ring to it. I walked toward the elevators, my heels clicking a sharp staccato on the floor tiles. I was not walking away from my life. I was walking toward it. I was walking toward justice. As I stepped into the elevator, I checked my reflection in the mirrored wall. The woman looking back at me was not the sad, discarded wife from the courtroom. She was powerful. She was dangerous. She was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. I pressed the button for the lobby. But I was not going home. I was going to the Winston Enterprises headquarters. I had a board meeting to attend, and I had some employees to fire. Jamal thought he was going to a victory party. He did not know he was walking into his own funeral. And this time I would not be serving the champagne. I would be serving the eviction notice. The conference room at Winston and Associates was a temple of glass and mahogany located on the 45th floor with a view that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The air smelled of fresh espresso and unchecked greed. Jamal sat at the head of the table spinning a gold pen between his fingers. He looked like a man who had already spent his first 10 million. He wore a tuxedo in the middle of the afternoon because in his mind, that is what billionaires did. To his right, Mama Estelle sat draped in a white mink coat, despite the climate-controlled air conditioning. She was flipping through a brochure for private islands circling the ones she liked with a red marker. Trey and Courtney were huddled together whispering about upgrading their flight to Paris to a private charter. Even Dominique had shown up, squeezing herself into a chair in the corner, looking bored and checking her makeup in a compact mirror. Uncle Vernon stood at the front of the room, adjusting his silk tie. He looked like a ringmaster presiding over his greatest show. He cleared his throat and smiled a smile that showed too many teeth. Family today marks the beginning of a new dynasty. Vernon announced, his voice smooth and practiced. We have weathered the storm, we have shed the dead weight, and now we are ready to claim what is rightfully ours. I have the transfer documents right here. Once Jamal signs, the funds will begin to flow. The Winston Empire is finally in the hands of its true heir. Jamal slammed his hand on the table, grinning. Finally. Give me the pen, Vernon. I have some shopping to do. Vernon slid a heavy leather-bound folder across the table. Jamal reached for it, his eyes hungry. The room was thick with anticipation. They were all leaning forward, ready to grab their slice of the pie. But before Jamal's fingers could touch the leather, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. It was not a polite entrance. It was an invasion. The sound of the doors hitting the wall echoed like a gunshot. Everyone jumped. Jamal spun around in his chair, anger flashing in his eyes. "Who the hell is interrupting us?" he shouted. "Security, get them out!" But it was not security. A man walked in first. He was older, distinguished, wearing a gray wool coat and a fedora. It was Arthur Henderson. He walked with a cane, but his steps were heavy and purposeful. He did not look at Vernon. He did not look at Jamal. He walked straight to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and pulled it out. Then she walked in. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a collective breath being held. It was Simone. But it was not the Simone they knew. It was not the woman in the stained black dress serving crab cakes. It was not the woman crying in the rain. Her hair was cut short in a sharp chic bob that framed her face. She was wearing a tailored white power suit that fit her like a second skin. It was crisp, immaculate, and terrifyingly expensive. She wore no jewelry, except for a simple gold pin on her lapel. The Winston family crest. She walked into the room like she owned the building, like she owned the air they were breathing. She did not look at the floor. She looked straight ahead, her eyes cold and clear. Jamal stood up, his face turning purple. "What is she doing here?" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at her. "We are divorced. Get that trash out of my office. Vernon, call the police. She is trespassing." Vernon looked pale. He was staring at Arthur Henderson with recognition and fear. "Sit down, Jamal," Arthur said, his voice cutting through Jamal's shouting like a knife. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I will not sit down," Jamal roared. "I am the CEO. I am the owner of this company." "No," Arthur said calmly, placing a single black folder on the table. "You are not." Simone walked to the head of the table. She stopped right next to Jamal. She looked him up and down, her expression one of mild distaste, as if he were a stain on the carpet. "You are in my chair, Jamal," she said softly. Jamal laughed a hysterical sound. "Your chair. You are delusional. You waived your rights. You signed the papers. You are nobody." Arthur Henderson cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Winston, allow me to introduce you to the new majority shareholder. This is Simone Winston, the chairwoman of the board for the Winston Asset Protection Trust, and as of 5 minutes ago, she is your boss." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the sound of Mama Estelle's marker dropping onto the table. Simone smiled. It was the same dangerous smile she had given him at the penthouse. "Move," she said, and for the first time in his life, Jamal was too terrified to disobey. The air in the conference room shifted instantly the moment Arthur Henderson stepped through the doors. He brought a chill with him, a gravity that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. He walked with a heavy cane, but he did not look frail. He looked like an old lion who had come to remind the cubs who really ruled the jungle. He stopped at the end of the long mahogany table and placed a black briefcase down with a deliberate thud. Jamal stared at him confused. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Security, get this old man out of here." Henderson did not answer. He just stepped aside, and then she walked in. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. Jamal's mouth fell open. Mama Estelle dropped her red marker on the floor. Courtney gasped, her hand flying to her throat. It was Simone. But it was not the Simone they had mocked and discarded. The long, frizzy hair was gone, replaced by a sharp, asymmetrical bob that highlighted the determined angle of her jaw. The faded department store clothes were gone. She wore a white structural power suit that glowed under the recessed lighting. It was tailored to within an inch of its life, hugging her waist and flaring at the hips. She looked taller. She looked lethal. She looked like a queen coming to claim her throne. Jamal recovered first, his shock turning to blind fury. He lunged forward, his face twisting into a sneer. "What is this?" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at her face. "Is this some kind of joke? You are trespassing, Simone. We are divorced. You signed the papers. You are nothing. Get out before I have you arrested." He looked at Vernon. "Call the police, Vernon. Tell them my ex-wife is harassing me." Vernon did not move. He was staring at the black briefcase on the table, his face draining of all color. He recognized the seal on the leather. He knew what was coming. Simone did not flinch at Jamal's shouting. She did not even blink. She walked past him, the scent of expensive perfume trailing in her wake. She stood at the head of the table right next to where Jamal had been sitting. "I said, get out!" Jamal screamed, grabbing her arm. That was the mistake. Henderson moved faster than anyone expected. He slammed a thick leather-bound folder onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot echoing off the glass walls. "Unhand her," Henderson barked, his voice deep and commanding. Jamal let go out of pure reflex, stepping back. "You do not tell me what to do, old man. I am the CEO. I own this building." Silence. Henderson roared. The single word vibrated through the room, shutting Jamal up instantly. He walked over to the table and flipped the folder open. "You own nothing, Jamal. You are a guest here, and you have overstayed your welcome." He turned to the stunned family. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Arthur Henderson. I was your father's private counsel for 30 years, and this," he pointed to the folder, "is the Winston Asset Protection Trust." Vernon finally found his voice. "That is impossible. I drafted the will. I am the executor." "You drafted the decoy," Henderson said coldly. "Winston knew you were incompetent, Vernon, and he knew you were corrupt. He set up this trust to protect his legacy from the vultures, meaning you." He looked at Jamal, who was shaking his head in denial. "The trust holds everything. The company, the properties, the accounts. $570 million. And the trust had a specific trigger clause." He paused, letting the tension build until it was unbearable. Clause 7B. "In the event of a divorce initiated by the beneficiary, the control of the trust transfers immediately to the trustee." Jamal laughed a nervous, high-pitched sound. So what? Who is the trustee? Some bank. I can fire them. Henderson smiled a dry, humorless smile. No, Jamal. You cannot fire the trustee, because the trustee is the only person Winston respected, the only person who actually loved him. He gestured to the woman in the white suit. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the chairwoman of the board. Meet the sole trustee of the Winston estate. Meet your boss, Ms. Simone Winston. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having just detonated. Jamal looked at Simone, his eyes wide with horror. He looked at the white suit. He looked at the cold, hard determination in her eyes. And for the first time he realized that the game was over, and he had lost. Simone looked at him. She did not smile. She simply pointed to the door. "Get out of my chair, Jamal," she said, her voice soft but turning the blood in his veins to ice. "You are sitting in my seat." Arthur Henderson opened the leather folder with a deliberation that was agonizing to watch. The sound of the heavy paper turning was the only noise in the expansive conference room. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked down at the document as if he were reading a scripture. To Jamal and his family, it might as well have been a death sentence. Arthur began to read, his voice steady and devoid of pity. Clause 7b, regarding the disposition of the Winston family estate. He paused, looking up over his glasses to ensure he had their full attention. The entirety of the estate, including all liquid assets, real estate holdings, intellectual property, and investment portfolios, valued at approximately $570 million, is hereby irrevocably placed into the Winston Asset Protection Trust. $570 million. The number hung in the air, shimmering like a mirage. Mama Estelle let out a small whimpering sound, clutching her mink coat tighter, as if the temperature in the room had suddenly dropped. Jamal was staring at the folder, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to process the words. Arthur continued. The trust was established to ensure the longevity of the family legacy. The primary beneficiary, Jamal Winston, was granted conditional access to these funds predicated on his stability and character. The metric for this stability was defined by the grantor Winston Sr. as the maintenance of his marriage to Simone Winston. Jamal flinched as if he had been slapped. He looked at Simone standing there in her white suit, cool and untouchable. She did not look back at him. She was looking at the city skyline, her profile sharp against the glass. Arthur raised his voice slightly, ensuring every syllable was heard. However, in the event that the beneficiary initiates a dissolution of said marriage or abandons the marital home, the trust activates its defensive protocols. Upon the finalization of divorce, which occurred exactly 45 minutes ago, all rights, access, and control previously afforded to Jamal Winston are immediately terminated. Terminated. The word echoed off the mahogany walls. Arthur flipped the page. Control of the trust, including the power to appoint board members, the authority to sign checks, and the legal title to all real property, is transferred in perpetuity to the designated trustee. That trustee is Simone Winston. Courtney let out a gasp, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. Trey slumped in his chair, his face gray. They realized instantly what this meant. The parties, the jets, the easy life. It was all gone. But Arthur was not finished. He had one final knife to twist. A specific instruction left by a father who knew exactly who his son was. As for Mr. Jamal Winston, Arthur read a small smile touching his lips. The grantor wishes to ensure he does not starve. Therefore, the trust shall provide him with a monthly living stipend. This stipend shall be equivalent to the current state average for unemployment benefits. Arthur looked at the paper, checking the figure, which is currently calculated at $1,200 per month. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. $1,200. That was less than what Jamal spent on a single bottle of champagne. That was less than the gas bill for the McLaren he had parked downstairs. Jamal stood up slowly, his legs shaking. "You are lying," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "My father would never do that. This is a fake. It is a forgery." Arthur closed the folder with a snap. "It is recorded with the state, Jamal. It is ironclad. You wanted to be a self-made man. You wanted to be free of Simone. Well, congratulations, you are free. And you are broke." Jamal looked at Simone. He looked at the woman he had called basic, the woman he had called a burden. He saw the power radiating off her. He saw the keys to the kingdom in her hand. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly small. He had traded a diamond for a stone, and now he had to live with the dust. Jamal sat there frozen in his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But I was not finished. I turned my gaze to the side of the table where Trey and Courtney were trying to make themselves invisible. They were shifting in their seats, exchanging frantic, terrified glances. They thought that because Jamal was the primary target, they might slip away unnoticed. They thought they could just walk out of the room and catch that flight to Paris. They were wrong. I lifted my hand and gave a small, sharp nod to the security guard standing by the door. He opened it wide. This time it was not a lawyer who entered. It was 4 officers from the Economic Crimes Division, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. The atmosphere in the room went from tense to suffocating in a heartbeat. Trey stood up, knocking his chair over. "What is this? What is going on?" I walked over to him, holding a thick binder in my hands. It was not the black trust folder. It was a red one. I had spent the last 3 weeks compiling it with a forensic accountant I hired using the last of my savings. "You always called me Basic Trey," I said, my voice calm and carrying through the silent room. "You said I was just a housewife. You forgot that before I was a housewife, I was a project manager. I know how to track a budget, and I know when numbers do not add up." I tossed the red binder onto the table in front of him. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the polished wood until it hit his chest. "Open it," I said. Trey's hands shook as he opened the cover. His face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. "I saw the invoices, Trey." I continued circling him like a shark. "I saw the payments to the consulting firm in the Cayman Islands. I saw the construction costs for materials that were never purchased. $2 million, Trey. You and Courtney have been siphoning money out of the company for 3 years. You were stealing from your own father while he was dying in the hospital." Courtney let out a shrill scream. "That is a lie. I did not do anything. I just signed the papers he gave me." She pointed a manicured finger at her husband, throwing him under the bus without a second thought. The lead officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click of the ratchet sounded like a heavy period at the end of a sentence. "Trey Winston and Courtney Winston, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." "No," Trey shouted, trying to back away. "This is a mistake. Jamal, tell them. Tell them I am the CFO." Jamal just sat there staring at the table. He could not save himself, let alone them. He was watching his entire world dismantle piece by piece. The officers grabbed Trey's arms, twisting them behind his back. He grunted in pain, but he did not fight. He knew the evidence was in that red binder. He knew I had him cold. Courtney was next. When the officer reached for her, she tried to run behind Mama Estelle, using the old woman as a human shield. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, her poise completely gone. "This is a Dior suit. You cannot arrest me. I am a mother." "You are a thief, Courtney," I said, stepping into her line of sight. "And you are going to prison. You wanted a life of luxury. You wanted to be famous. Well, you are going to be on the news tonight." They dragged them out of the room, kicking and screaming. The sound of Courtney's heels scraping against the floor tiles echoed down the hallway. I watched them go, feeling absolutely nothing. No joy, no sadness, just the cold satisfaction of balancing the books. They had treated me like dirt for 5 years. They had stolen from the man who gave them everything. Now the debt was paid. I turned back to the table where Jamal and Vernon sat in stunned silence. The room was quieter now, cleaner. I looked at Jamal. The king was dethroned, the knights were in chains, and the queen was just getting started. The room was quiet now. The chaotic energy of the police raid had faded, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. Trey and Courtney were gone, their shouts fading into the elevator shaft. Only 3 people remained at the long table. Me, Jamal, and Mama Estelle. Estelle sat in her chair clutching the collar of her white mink coat as if it were a life raft in a storm. Her face was pale, her makeup standing out in stark relief against her terrified skin. She looked from the empty doorway where her son had just been dragged away back to me. Her eyes were wide, not with remorse, but with self-preservation. She did not care about Trey. She cared about herself. Simone. She began, her voice trembling. A nervous smile flickered on her lips. This is all very dramatic. But surely we can be reasonable. I understand you are angry with Jamal. He was foolish. But I am an old woman. I am the matriarch of this family. I stood at the head of the table smoothing the lapel of my white suit. I did not smile back. You are not the matriarch, Estelle, I said coldly. You are a dependent. She bristled, her old arrogance flaring up for a second. Excuse me. I am Mrs. Winston. I live in the Winston estate. That is my home. Winston built it for me. I picked up the black folder again, flipping to the section on real estate. Actually, I said, my finger tracing the line on the page. Winston built it for the family, but 5 years ago he transferred the deed to the trust. He told me he was worried about your bingo habits. He was worried you would gamble the house away once he was gone. Estelle gasped. That is a lie. It is in black and white, I said, tapping the page. The house belongs to the trust. And since I am the trustee, that means I am your landlord. I closed the folder with a snap. And as your landlord, I have been reviewing the tenant agreements. It seems you have been living there rent-free for years. The trust can no longer support non-performing assets. Rent, Estelle sputtered. You cannot charge me rent. I am his widow. You are a tenant, I corrected. And a very expensive one. The maintenance on that estate alone is $15,000 a month. The heating, the pool, the staff. It adds up. I walked closer to her, leaning down so our faces were level. You used to tell me that nothing in life is free, right? You told me that when I asked for help with my student loans. You said handouts make people weak. Well, Estelle, I am helping you be strong. I straightened up and looked at my watch. Market value for a property of that size is $25,000 a month, retroactive to the date of Winston's death. 25,000, she shrieked. I do not have that kind of money. My allowance is only 5,000. Then I guess you cannot afford the lease? I said simply. I pulled a document from the folder. It was a standard eviction notice. I slid it across the table until it rested under her trembling hands. This is a notice to vacate. You have 3 days to remove your personal effects. Anything left after 72 hours will be auctioned off to recoup the back rent you owe the trust. 3 days, she whispered, tears finally spilling onto her mink coat. But where will I go? This is my home. You cannot throw me on the street. I looked at her without an ounce of pity. I remembered the day she threw my clothes on the driveway because she wanted to turn my sewing room into a closet for her furs. I remembered how she laughed when I had to pick them up in the rain. You have friends, Estelle, I said. Go stay with the ladies from your bridge club, or maybe you can find a nice affordable apartment in the city. I hear the senior center has vacancies. She looked at Jamal, begging him to intervene. Jamal, do something. She is evicting your mother. Jamal did not look up. He was staring at his own hands, lost in his own nightmare. He knew he could not save her. He could not even save himself. I turned my back on her. 3 days, Estelle. And please do not take the silver. I have an inventory list and I will be checking. The conference room was clearing out. Mama Estelle was sobbing into her phone in the hallway, trying to find a friend who would take her in. The police had already taken Trey and Courtney down to the booking station. The air in the room felt lighter, cleansed of the lies that had filled it for so long. But there was one last act to play out. Jamal sat alone at the table, his head in his hands. He looked up and saw Dominique standing by the window. She was typing furiously on her phone, her thumbs moving like lightning. Jamal's face softened just a fraction. He still thought he had an ally. He still thought he had love. "Baby," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "It is okay. We will figure this out. I am still a Winston. I have connections. We can rebuild. As long as we have each other and the baby, we are rich." Dominique stopped typing. She looked up. Her face was not the face of a loving partner. It was the face of a woman who had just realized her investment had gone to zero. She looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Rebuild." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Rebuild with what, Jamal? You have $1,200 a month. My manicure costs more than your rent." She walked over to the table, not to comfort him, but to loom over him. "I just got a text from my friend at the bank," she spat. "Your accounts are frozen." The transfer to the jeweler bounced. "This ring on my finger. It is stolen property." She ripped the massive yellow diamond off her hand. She did not hand it to him gently. She threw it. It hit the mahogany table with a sharp crack, spinning on the wood before falling to the floor. "It is fake anyway," she sneered. "Just like you. You promised me a private island. You promised me the world, and you are nothing but a broke loser with a mountain of debt." Jamal reached for her hand, trying to pull her close. "Dominique, wait. Do not say that. Think about our son. Think about the baby." She snatched her hand away as if he had burned her. She took a step back, her eyes cold and hard. "About that," she said, smoothing her dress. "You really are gullible, aren't you?" Jamal froze. "What do you mean?" She laughed again, and this time it was cruel. "There is no baby, Jamal. Or at least there is no Winston baby." The color drained from Jamal's face, leaving him looking like a corpse. "What?" he whispered. "I am pregnant," she said, shrugging. "But not by you. It belongs to my personal trainer. He has a future. He owns his own gym. Unlike you, who does not even own the suit on your back." She grabbed her purse, the expensive one he had bought her with credit. "I just needed a sponsor," she said casually. "I needed someone to pay the bills until I was ready. I thought you were my ticket, but you were just a dead end." She turned on her heel and walked toward the door. Jamal scrambled up from his chair, knocking it over in his haste. "Dominique, no!" He screamed, tears streaming down his face. "You cannot leave me. I have nothing else." She paused at the door, looking back at him one last time. "Then you better get used to being lonely," she said. "And Jamal, good luck with that $5 million you owe Big Sal. I heard he breaks legs for fun." She slammed the door, leaving him in the echoing silence. I watched from the head of the table. He was on his knees, sobbing into the carpet, reaching for a woman who never loved him, mourning a child that never existed. He was completely and utterly alone. And I felt the final weight lift off my shoulders. The tower had fallen. The silence in the conference room was absolute. The door had clicked shut, sealing Dominique's exit, and with it the last shred of Jamal's delusion. He was alone, truly and terrifyingly alone. The silence stretched out, pressing down on us like a physical weight. I stood still at the head of the table, my hand resting on the black folder. Arthur Henderson watched from his corner, silent as a judge. Jamal turned his head slowly. His eyes were red and swollen, his face streaked with tears and snot. He looked at me. He did not see the woman he had ridiculed. He did not see the basic wife he had discarded. He saw a life raft in a hurricane. He saw the only person in the world who could stop the monsters coming for him. "Simone," he croaked, his voice broken. Then he moved. He did not walk. He crumbled. He fell forward onto his hands and knees and crawled. He scrambled across the plush carpet, dragging himself toward me like a wounded animal. He reached out with shaking hands and grabbed the hem of my white pants, burying his face in the fabric. "Please." He sobbed, his body heaving with the force of his terror. "Please, Simone. You cannot leave me like this. You cannot let them kill me. Big Sal. He is going to come for me. He is going to kill me." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and frantic. "I need $5 million. Just 5 million. That is nothing to you now. You have hundreds of millions. Please, just write a check. I will go away. I will disappear. I promise." I looked down at him. This was the man who had stood in the rain and laughed while I shivered. This was the man who had thrown money in the mud and told me to pick it up. Now he was on his knees, wiping his tears on my suit, begging for a fraction of what he had thrown away. I pulled my leg away from his grasp, stepping back so he fell forward onto the floor. "Get up, Jamal," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "You are ruining my suit." He scrambled up to his knees, clasping his hands together in a prayer. "Simone, baby, please. We were married. We were family. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I made a mistake. I was stupid. I was blinded by the money. But I love you. I always loved you. Dominique meant nothing. She was just a distraction. You are my wife. You are my heart." He was desperate enough to lie even now. He thought he could manipulate me one last time. He thought he could play on the love I used to have for him. But that love was dead. He had killed it. I looked at him coldly. "You do not love me, Jamal. You love the safety I provided. You love the way I cleaned up your messes. But I am not your cleaner anymore." I walked over to the table and picked up the black folder. "You want money?" I asked. His eyes lit up with hope. "Yes. Please. Just a loan." I opened the folder and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was the printout of his monthly stipend schedule. "I can advance you next month's payment," I said, dropping the paper on the floor in front of him. $1,200. It might buy you a bus ticket out of town before Sal finds you." He stared at the paper as if it were an insult. $1,200, he whispered. "That is a death sentence. That is the inheritance you earned," I replied, turning toward the door. "Simone, wait!" he screamed, lunging for me again. But Henderson stepped in, blocking his path with the heavy cane. "Let her go," Jamal Henderson rumbled. "It is over." I walked to the door, my steps echoing in the hallway. Behind me, I heard Jamal collapse again, wailing like a child in the dark. He was begging for mercy from a universe he had spent his whole life mocking. But the universe was not listening. And neither was I. I stopped at the door, my hand hovering over the cold brass handle. Behind me, Jamal was making sounds that were barely human, gasping for air in a puddle of his own making. I should have walked out. I should have let the sharks come for him. It would have been justice. But then I looked at the portrait of Winston hanging on the far wall. The old man looked down at me, his eyes kind and expectant. He had built this name from nothing. He had spent 50 years making the word Winston mean integrity and strength. If Jamal was found dead in a ditch over a gambling debt, it would stain that legacy forever. I could not save Jamal the man, but I had to save Winston the name. I turned around slowly. Jamal looked up, his eyes swollen with hope as he saw me stop. He scrambled to his knees, looking pathetic and small in the middle of the massive room. "Get up, Jamal," I said, my voice flat. He stumbled to his feet, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "You will help me," he whispered. "You will pay him." I walked back to the table. "I will pay the debt," I said, "not for you. I do not care what happens to you. I am doing it for your father. I will not have his name dragged through the mud because his son is a degenerate gambler." Jamal let out a sob of relief, slumping against the table. "Thank you, Simone. Thank you. I knew you still loved me. I knew—" "Stop," I interrupted, cutting him off with a glare. "I am not finished. I am buying your life, Jamal, and everything has a price." I looked at Arthur Henderson. He understood immediately. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a long legal document. It was short and brutal. You are going to sign this, I said, sliding the paper toward him. It is a permanent renunciation of the Winston name and estate. It says you will never contest the will again. You will never ask for a penny. You will never speak to the press. You cease to be a Winston in everything but blood. I will sign it, Jamal said, reaching for the pen. Anything, just pay Sal. I pulled the paper back, and I added, my voice dropping to a whisper. There is one more condition. The trust provides a stipend, but it is not enough to live on in this city. You need a job, Jamal. You need to learn the value of $1. He nodded eagerly. I will do anything. Put me in sales. Put me in marketing. I can sell. I laughed, a cold, dry sound. You are not going to be in sales, Jamal. You are not going to be an executive. You are going to start at the bottom. The very bottom. I pointed out the window at the gleaming glass tower of the headquarters. You are going to work for the building maintenance team, specifically the sanitation department. Jamal froze. You mean a janitor? I mean a janitor, I said. You are going to clean the floors of the building you thought you owned. You are going to empty the trash cans of the people you used to fire. You are going to scrub the toilets in the executive washroom. He looked at me with horror. I cannot do that. I am Jamal Winston. People know me. People knew the arrogant boy who spent his father's money, I corrected. Now they will know the man who cleans up his own mess. That is the deal, Jamal. 5 years. You show up every day on time. You do the work. If you quit, if you miss a shift, if you complain, the trust stops paying your rent, and I stop protecting you from Big Sal. I leaned in close. You treated people like dirt your whole life, Jamal. Now you are going to learn what it feels like to clean it up. He looked at the pen. He looked at the door where the imaginary hitmen were waiting. He looked at the mop bucket in his mind. He was trapped. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He signed his name. It was a messy scrawl, a surrender. Arthur Henderson took the paper and placed a heavy iron key on the table. It was not the key to the executive washroom. It was the key to the janitor's closet in the basement. Your shift starts at 6 a.m. tomorrow, Jamal Arthur said. Do not be late. The floors need waxing. I turned and walked out the door, and this time I did not stop. I left him standing there staring at the key, the new king of the broom closet. Justice had been served, and it smelled like bleach. The iron gates of the Winston estate slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Mama Estelle's hollow bones. She stood on the wet pavement looking back at the mansion one last time. It was not her home anymore. It was a fortress she was barred from entering. She looked down at her hands. There were no porters to help her, no limousines waiting to whisk her away. There were just 3 bulging black trash bags holding the last of her wardrobe. Her white mink coat was stained with mud at the hem, a perfect symbol of her fallen grace. The taxi ride to the crumbling apartment complex took 40 minutes, and the driver made her pay in cash before she got out. She dragged her bags up the graffiti-stained stairs, the smell of stale cigarettes and despair choking her. Her new kingdom was a studio apartment with a leaking faucet and a view of a dumpster. There was no room for her vanity table. There was barely room for her regret. But pride does not fill an empty stomach. The next morning, she put on her last clean blouse and walked to the discount grocery store down the block. She stood in front of the manager, a pimply teenager chewing gum, who did not know or care who the Winstons were. She did not demand. She did not shout. She lowered her head and asked for an application. Name, he asked without looking up. Estelle. She whispered, her voice trembling with shame. Just Estelle. He handed her a green smock that smelled of cheap bleach. Register 3 is open, he said, pointing a greasy finger. Get to work. And the woman who used to ring a silver bell for her tea began scanning discount coupons for strangers. The gavel came down on Trey's sentence like a coffin lid slamming shut. 10 years for fraud. As the bailiffs dragged him away, he looked to the gallery searching for his wife. He looked for Courtney, hoping for a tear or a wave or a promise. Instead, he saw her back. She did not even stay for the sentencing. She handed a process server the divorce papers in the hallway and walked out of the courthouse before the handcuffs were even locked on his wrists. She thought she could scrub the stain of his crime off her designer dress and return to the gala circuit. She was wrong. The high society she worshipped shut its doors in her face. The country club revoked her membership. Her charity friends blocked her number. She was radioactive. The woman who mocked Simone for being basic was now uninvited from the world she thought she owned. 6 months later, the fall was complete. At a dusty roadside diner off Interstate 85, a waitress named Courtney refilled coffee cups for truckers. Her manicure was gone, replaced by chipped nails and grease burns. She wore a stained polyester uniform that smelled of fry oil. When a customer yelled at her for cold eggs, she didn't roll her eyes. She didn't make a snide remark. She just bowed her head, whispered sorry, and hurried back to the kitchen to scrape leftovers into the trash. The trophy wife had become the help, and there was no one left to tip her. I sat in the corner office, but I changed the view. The dark, heavy drapes were gone, replaced by floor-to-ceiling glass that let the light flood in. I used the $570 million not to hoard, but to heal. I fired the sycophants and hired visionaries. We pivoted Winston Enterprises away from vanity projects and toward the future. We focused on green architecture and sustainable housing. We built libraries instead of casinos and schools, instead of high-rise condos for the ultra-rich. I turned the empire of greed into a beacon of hope. But there was one ghost I had to exorcise personally. I bought the old family mansion back from the trust. I walked through the empty, echoing halls where I had been treated like a servant in my own home. I stood in the kitchen where I had cooked their meals and felt the cold chill of their memories. I did not move back in. I hired a bulldozer. I watched the walls crumble into dust, the marble and gold turning to rubble. I leveled the site and gave it back to the earth. In its place, I built a park. I filled it with cherry blossoms and playgrounds. Now where Mama Estelle used to scream at the maids, children run and laugh. Where Jamal used to hide his secrets, families have picnics on the grass. I turned a monument of misery into a garden of joy. I did not just take their money. I rewrote their history. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Winston Tower, turning the building into a pillar of gold. It was a beautiful day, the kind of crisp autumn morning that smelled of dry leaves and new money. I walked out of the main revolving doors, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the pavement. I was not rushing. I had nowhere to be, but exactly where I chose to be. I was wearing a trench coat the color of honey and sunglasses that shielded my eyes from the glare. The sidewalk was busy with people rushing to work, clutching coffee cups and checking their watches. I moved through them easily, a swimmer navigating a familiar current. I checked my phone. I had a meeting with the city council at 10 to discuss the expansion of the community library. I had a lunch date with Arthur Henderson to celebrate his retirement. My calendar was full, but it was full of things that mattered, things that I had built. Then I saw him. He was standing near the curb, wrestling with a heavy black trash bag that had split open. He wore a navy blue jumpsuit with a gray stripe down the side, the standard issue uniform for the building maintenance crew. It was 2 sizes too big, hanging off his frame like a shroud. He looked thinner. His hair, once perfectly faded and styled, was hidden under a cheap mesh baseball cap. It was Jamal, the man who wanted to be a king, the man who thought the world existed to serve him. He was stooped over, picking up sodden coffee cups and sandwich wrappers with gloved hands. It was a slow, repetitive motion. Bend, grab, toss, bend, grab, toss. I slowed my pace just a fraction, not to gloat, not to laugh, but simply to witness. To confirm that the ghost that had haunted me for so long was truly gone. He must have felt my presence because he froze. He looked up slowly, shielding his eyes against the sun. For a heartbeat, time stopped. He saw me. He saw the woman he had called boring. He saw the woman he had tried to break standing tall and whole. He saw the expensive coat. He saw the freedom in my posture. His eyes widened in recognition, and then immediately filled with a crushing shame. A hot red flush started at his neck and burned its way up his cheeks. He did not say my name. He did not ask for help. He simply looked down. He pulled the cap lower over his face, trying to disappear into his collar, trying to become invisible. He turned his back to me, pretending to scrub a stain on the concrete, his movements frantic and jerky. He could not bear to look at the sun anymore. I did not stop. I did not say hello. I did not offer a nod of forgiveness or a smile of pity. There was nothing left to say. He was just a stranger now. A cautionary tale wearing a name tag. I walked past him, the hem of my coat brushing the air near him, but never touching him. I left him on the curb with his trash and his choices. A black sedan was waiting for me at the corner. The driver opened the rear door and I slid into the cool leather seat. It smelled of vanilla and quiet luxury. I took off my sunglasses and looked out the tinted window. I could see him in the side mirror, a small blue figure shrinking in the distance, until he was just a speck against the gray concrete, a shadow that the sun had finally burned away. "To the new site, ma'am," the driver asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. "Take me to the park, and then just keep driving." The car pulled away, merging smoothly into the flow of traffic, leaving the tower, and the man who cleaned it far behind. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of the city. It tasted sweet. It tasted like justice. The war was over. The debt was paid. And for the first time in my life, the road ahead was wide open. This story teaches us that true power lies in resilience and character, not in arrogance or unearned wealth. Jamal and his family mistook Simone's silence for weakness, failing to realize that she was the true architect of their reality. They believed money made them untouchable, but they learned that treating people with contempt is the fastest way to lose everything. The ultimate lesson is that dignity is a long game. While greed screams for attention, justice waits patiently for the right moment to strike. Never underestimate the quiet person who knows your secrets and holds the keys to your castle. If you believe that the best revenge is massive success, and that karma never loses an address, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Comment justice down below if you are building your own empire in silence. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.